Matthew 12, verses 9 to 23. Jesus heals a man with a withered hand. The Greek word that we will be featuring is pais, number 622, which means child. And other words, as we go through, we'll find out. And we are going to feature again the nouns as we have in the past week, color-coded. It begins in verse 9. Ke metavas akethan, and having crossed over from there, Ilthan is ten synagogin afton. He came into their synagogue. So now he is in a church type of an atmosphere. Religious people that are going to hear things of God, hopefully, and a rabbi that leads them. In verse 10, Ke idu, and behold, anthropos in ten hira akon xiran. And there was a man having a hand withered. Now we can see here, having crossed, he came into their synagogue as the object. Synagogue is where he came. Jesus came into the synagogue, and synagogue is the object. And then in the second one, we see in the red that this is in the nominative, and that is the subject of the sentence. So the subject is, it says, and behold, a man was there, basically. So you can read always when you go and see the nominative, you can put it at the beginning in English. It doesn't work that way in Greek, though. So a man was there having a withered hand, and the hand is the object. And it's in brown. His hand was withered. Ke epirotisan avton legontes, and they asked him, saying, E existi te salvasi therapevin? Is it allowed on the Sabbaths to cure? Now, we went through the Sabbaths, I think, the last video, and you can see more about that if you want to go there. So somebody is asking him, more than one person apparently, if it's allowed to cure on the Sabbath. Now, therapevin, we have therapeutics, comes from that word, 23:23. It's also translated into English as attend. It appears 8 times in the Old Testament, and there it's generally always to attend, and appears 44 times in the New Testament, generally always to cure. In the Old Testament, 2 Kings 19:24 says, and Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, went down for a meeting with the king and attended not to his feet. So you wouldn't say he didn't cure anything. There's nothing to do with curing his feet. So it's attend also. So this is what is in the Greek, is we can have different meanings in English for the Greek word. And people want me to always use the same word for a continuity. It just can't be that way because the context so many times wouldn't allow it. So here you couldn't say he cured his toenails. I mean, no. Yeah, so he attended to them. And 2 Kings 19:16, it says, and Jehu, the king of Israel, rode and went to Jezreel, for Joram was being attended to in Jezreel, and he's going to destroy the king, Joram, and he's being attended because he was wounded. Proverbs 19:6, it says, many attend to the persons of a king. But then in the New Testament, in Luke 4:23, it says, assuredly you shall say to me this parable, physician, attend to yourself. See, now even in the New Testament to say cure, it just doesn't sound right. Cure yourself? I don't think so. In Luke 10:9, it says, and attend to the weak in it. And that's Jesus' command to the disciples. And say to them, the kingdom of God approaches. So attend to the weak. So you wouldn't say cure the weak in it. just doesn't go. So, but here we have, is it allowed to cure on the Sabbaths? I suppose you could use attend, but that would be too vague for what they're charging him against. And then it continues, ina kategorisosin havtu, so that they should charge him. Now, here's another word. It's a legal term, is to charge somebody, but a non-legal term would be to accuse, which is used in other places instead of charge. That you could say that they should accuse him. It would be okay, yeah, but they are. This is more of a legal situation here with these priests and the legality of the Jewish laws, more or less. In John 5:45, Jesus says, "Do not think I accuse you to the Father." Now, charging, I don't think that would be right. Do not think that I charge you to the Father or accuse you. Sometimes it's hard to determine which is the best word. Just showing you the ins and outs of when translating the Bible. Don't be too dogmatic, but yet do be dogmatic in certain places. Matthew 27:12, it says, "And in the charging him by the chief priests and the elders, he answered nothing." So here we got a charge by the chief priests and elders, charging him of doing something that is illegal. This was right at the crucifixion. But then in Revelations 12:10 we see, "For the accuser of our brethren was cast down, the one accusing them before our God day and night." So I think here, accuser of our brethren is better than the charger when charging. Could be, but the two different possibilities. And then in verse 11 it continues and it says, "O they epen av tis." Then he said to them, tis, and here we have these circles around the pronouns that are not personal pronouns, interrogative what. What? Tis este eximon anthropos os exi provaton en. What man will there be from out of you who will have one sheep, ke ean empesi tuto ti salvasin, and if this one sheep should fall in the Sabbaths, is vothinon a cistern, uki kratisi afto ke ageri, will he not grab a hold of it and raise it? So therefore he's doing work on the Sabbath. They could charge him. In the last section we go through this into detail. In verse 12 he continues, "Poso un diaferi anthropos provatu." How much then differs a man than a sheep? Well, a lot of difference. And there and here now we got the nominative. And then it would be, a man differs how much than a sheep. You could read it in that way, because this is the nominative, the subject, and a sheep is in the genitive of having a sheep. Oste existi ti salvasi kalos pien. So, it is allowed to do well on the Sabbath, and they're in the Sabbaths, and that's in the dative, the indirect object, to or in, on, in verse 13. Tote legi to anthropo, and he says to the man, the dative to the man, ektinontin hirasu, stretch out your hand in the imperative. Ke exetinen, and he stretched it out. There it is. And ke apokatastathi igis os I ali, and it was restored in health as the other one. Health, hygiene comes from the words igis, igi, hygiene. It was restored in health. Other place is called it's sound. Sound. Something is in good shape. It's sound. Nothing to do with hearing. It's sound. And we see in Leviticus 13 where it talks about health. In the Old Testament it says, "But if the healthy flesh should restore and turn white, then he shall come to the priest. This was concerning leprosy. But in John 5:4, it says, the one then first stepping in after the disturbance of the water became sound in whatsoever disease he was held. And became in health. It could be health. You could use it either one. Sometimes you can go either way. So this is why it's so important here going through the Bible as I am. I'm showing you what these different words mean and which words you can use. No two people are going to translate the Bible the same way. It's an impossibility. And if you have a bunch of people translating, you completely lose continuity, because one person knows what that word is used in other places. But if you had 10 different people translating different parts of the Bible, which I see some Bibles make a big deal out of all these different PhDs translating, and I'm going, oh yeah, wow, what a disaster this is going to be. But yet people want to see all these credentials and think that's the best thing. Well, it's not. But the continuity is something that you can see here, and we're going through and showing you how one person could use being in health and the other person could use sound for the same exact place. And you'd have a whole different translation, but that's not what I'm trying to display. I'm trying to display to you the Greek. That's the original. We're not changing that at all. Aegeis is aegeis, and now, in trying to figure out what it is in English, yeah, well, there's where the problem comes, but it's not in the original word that God chose, aegeis, so it's important to understand what that word means in the Greek, which we are doing. No other Bible does that I know. In my lifetime, the Apostolic Bible is the best at this, because you have a continuity of going to the Old and New Testament Greek. There are other good New Testaments, Barry's Interlinear, which I purchased when I first became born from above, which got me going into this, but it's only a New Testament. And there was no Greek Old Testament that was numerically coded, so I began and finished it up. And there was a Hebrew Old Testament. I have it behind me by J. Green, and it's an interlinear like this, but it's all Hebrew, which is really great, and I use it a lot. So tools that you have, take advantage of them, I would suggest. Now, in 14 it says, "Ide Pharisei symvulion elavon kat avtu." Now here we have the Pharisees, these legalistic people who don't believe in Jesus, most of them, although Nicodemus, I don't think Nicodemus was a Pharisee, he was a priest. But the Pharisees took counsel against him. And I look at today, the Pharisees in Israel, we have the progeny of the crucifiers. All the people that are in Israel and the Jews today are basically children of the ones that denied Christ. The ones that accepted Christ at the time of Christ's crucifixion have all become Christians. And then after that was left, Israel was destroyed. All the Jews went throughout the world, and those Jews that went throughout the world were either Christians who became Christians, no longer followed the Judaism, which they couldn't any longer because of no temple or priesthood, but the other ones tried to make up for it by the oral law, which we went through in the last section, and they went out and through thousands of generations or hundreds of generations to today, 2,000 years, they are the progeny of the crucifiers, the one that crucified Jesus, and they are still there. And I'm not going to condemn, because hopefully they would see, instead of looking at the Torah, which I was just reading a rabbi on the Jerusalem Post pushing a big deal about the Torah, studying the Torah, and I'm thinking, well, they should be Torah. Torah's gone. There's no temple, no nothing. So why study all these things? It should be studying the prophets. If you study the prophets, very, very, very difficult to not see Jesus in it. You'd almost have to be blinded by Satan, the ruler of this world, to not see Jesus in the Hebrew prophecies. And do they study the prophets? I don't know for sure, but I'm having my doubts. So these Pharisees, they took counsel against him, and these people would probably do the same thing today. And it says, "Elxelthontes, having gone forth opos avton apolesosin, how they should destroy him. Now, they want to destroy Jesus. Now, today, and people want to destroy Christians, and Jesus says it's not you they're after me. They do not want Jesus. And who more than the Jews don't want Jesus? Muslims, yes, they don't want Jesus, but not anywhere bad as the Jews would be if the Hasidic Jews, the people that were rabid Jewish, they would not want the Christians because of Christ dealing with them, being a Jew himself. I think that the Jews would probably rather have a Muslim. But in verse 14, that they should destroy him. Now here's another word. If it's in the active, if you're actively doing something, the word would be destroyed. But if the word was passive, something that's happened, it's used, the word perish is used. And we see in Genesis 19:13 where it says, "For we destroy this place, for their cry was raised up high before the Lord, and that were the angels of Sodom going into Sodom to destroy the place." They're going to destroy Sodom. But then in Matthew 8:25, it says, "And his disciples coming forward roused him, saying, O Lord, save us, we perish." This was in the boat was being flooded, and they woke up Jesus. Save us, we perish. It didn't say they're being destroyed. They perish. So there's another word. It can be either way. To me, you have to choose which one would be the best for the context and using it in English. And 15 continues, O they Isus genos, but Jesus having known, anahorison akithan, he withdrew from there. Ke ikoluthison avto okli poli, and great multitudes followed him. Ke atherapevson avtus passus, and he cured them all. Therapeutics comes from that. In verse 16, Ke epitimison avtis ina me phanaron avton pisosin, that they should not make him known openly. And I put known, not make him openly. I don't know what else it would be than known. I don't know why he wouldn't want them. 5,000 people are going to make him known. It's one of these strange structures that I have a little bit of difficulty understanding. But it continues in 17, Opos plirothi torithan via Isaiu to prophetu legonta, so that should be fulfilled the thing having been spoken through Isaiah the prophet, saying. So now Matthew is tying this into Isaiah, and this would be a quote of Isaiah 42, 1-4. And it is, in Idhu o pesmu on iratisa, behold my child whom I selected. We have the pace here, another word different, 3 different words for that one. Child, servant, and boys, whom I selected. My child, or servant. Genesis 9:26 says, and he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan will be his domestic servant. So this shows where the word servant is used for this word pace. In the Old Testament, Matthew 2:16, it says, and having sent, that is Herod, he did away with all the pace, the boys in Bethlehem. It uses boys here because a pace is masculine, so it would be a male child. Whom I selected. Behold my pace, my servant, who I selected. Could be a servant here. You could choose either one. O agapitos mu, my beloved. And also in Matthew 8:6, O Lord, my servant is lying in the house paralytic. It doesn't say his child, because this was the centurion saying this. Matthew 14:2, and he said to his servants, This is John the Immerser. he is risen from the dead, and that is Herod, to his servants, not to his children. So his servants would be fine. Matthew 21:15, and the chief priests and the scribes beholding the wonders which he did, and the children crying out in the temple. And so now, could it be the servants crying out in the temple? That would be a stretch. But I preferred children. Somebody could put servants and have a good argument. Acts 3:13, it says, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the God of our fathers, glorified his servant Jesus. His child Jesus, could use that, I suppose. In Acts 4:25, it says, the one having spoken through the mouth of David, your servant. So here we see boys, child, servant. O agapitos mu, my beloved. And his beloved is in Matthew 17:5, where it says, and behold, there was a voice from out of the cloud saying, this is my son, the beloved, in whom I take pleasure in. Hearken to him, to him. And then he says, is on evdokison e psyche mu, in whom my soul takes pleasure. Now this is interesting because we're talking about God speaking here, and it continues, Theso to pneuma mu epavton, I will put my spirit upon him, so his soul, and he's going to put his spirit, pneuma, upon him. Ke krisin tis ethnisi apangeli, and he will report judgment to the nations. Judgment, also it's a case. It could be either one. In John 16:11 it says, and considering judgment, for the ruler of this world has been judged. In Jude 1:9 it says, and Michael the archangel, when litigating against the devil, that's another legal term, litigating, reasoned concerning Moses' body. He did not dare to bring a blasphemous case, but said, may the Lord reproach you. So a case, because the angel didn't judge anybody but the Lord. And so he brought a case. So here, and he will report a case to the nation, something to the nations. And then in 19 it continues, Ukarisi, he will not contend. Now this still is part of that quote of Isaiah. Ude kravgasi, nor cry out. Ude akusi tis entes platies tin phonin of two. Nor will anyone hear his voice in the squares. But it says in Luke 13:26, Jesus says, then you will begin to say, well, we ate in your presence, and we drank, and in our squares you taught. So you could see that and say, well, that's the opposite, because it says here, will anyone hear? Well, here, akusi could be also used as to hearken, to take it in, his voice in the squares, where they take it in, and the idea of him yelling or contending is different than teaching in the squares, where Jesus brings this up. Apparently he did. Verse 20, kalamo sentatrimenion u kataoxi, then he will not break away a reed. And then he would be the part of the verb, and that would be the noun, that would be the subject, and a reed is the object, and it's in brown. Ke linon tifomenon u savesi, and he again is the subject, will not extinguish a smoldering, is the adjective, the flax, and the object, so it's brown. Eos an ekvali is nikos ten krisin. Now here we have, instead of judgment, we have equity. Whenever he should cast forth equity into victory, or judgment into victory. It's interesting how these words in the Greek and how English takes different words, makes more words, different words to explain it. In verse 21, it continues, K en to onomati avtu ethni elpiusin, and in his name nations will hope. Now this is the end of the quotation of Isaiah, but it says in Romans 15:12, where it quotes Isaiah, but in a different place, it quotes Isaiah 11:10, and Paul says, and again, Isaiah says, there will be the root of Jesse and the one rising up to rule nations. Upon him nations shall hope. And this would be Jesus, because Paul is showing us that this is who it's talking about. In verse 22, Tote prosinenthi avto theamonizomenos. Then was brought to him one being demon-possessed. Now, exactly what that was like, I mean, it would be horrible. I was a psychiatric technician back in the early 60s at a mental hospital, and I've seen people that were possessed. We didn't call them demon-possessed, you called them mentally ill or crazy, the street term, and they were really not in control of themselves, and the thought process wasn't, they would see something and it would be different. They would explain it differently, what they see. They would be paranoid. There was like 3 different things that you look for schizophrenia. When somebody thinks something is a certain way, but it's not, or when you think it's not a certain way where it is, and the third was thinking somebody's after you, being paranoid. And so all of these things of being demon-possessed, I can see it because I saw people like that. And but this person was also tiflos ke kophos, blind and mute, adjectives. So he was in bad shape. This guy was blind, mute, couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything, and just acting crazy like, horrible. I mean, that's just terrible. I've seen a lot of things like that at the hospital. K etherapevsin afton, and he cured him. Oh, thank you, Jesus, to cure people that are like that. I mean, I wish it happened more, that this would happen. Then oste ton tiflon ke kophon ke laulin ke vlepin, so as for the blind one and the mute one, even to speak and to see. Wow. So the people that see this, I mean, it would be like if I saw this man that I knew, I was working there for years, and he was this way, blind, mute, and he was acting, insane. And then a man comes in and touches him, and all of a sudden he can see, he can talk, and he's no longer acting crazy. Can you imagine? I mean, it's like we read these and take it for granted because it's like over and over in the Bible. Oh, yeah, the blind, the one that can see, and the mute. Jesus just did this and this and did this. It's like, no, this is not just, this is amazing. I mean, if you were there, you'd be on the ground crying at him, saying, my God, my God. It would be unbelievable to experience something like this. And so what it says exactly that in verse 23, Ke existanto Pontus e Ocli, and all the multitudes were amazed. Ke elegon, miti utos estin, o ios David? And they said, is this not the son of David, the Messiah? And boy, the Jews today, if they would see Jesus in the power of Christ, is this the Messiah and we've missed it all? Yes, you missed it all. Unfortunately, now, though the nations, which is called the Gentiles in the King James, me, at least as far as I know, the Gentiles now have your Messiah, the Jewish progeny of the crucifiers. All you have are a bunch of guns and people hating you in the world, wanting to kill you, wanting to destroying Israel today. Now we see today, and this is the 11th of April, 2024, where the word nuclear is appearing now in the Jerusalem Times, the Jerusalem Post, the Times of Israel, Haaretz, Al Jazeera, the Muslim newspaper, and the American newspapers, Reuters, nuclear, and this, how many nuclear missiles and bombs and submarines does Israel have that it can destroy all these people? Iran is coming together. They're in the last phases to building a nuclear bomb. And the Israelites, Israel just killed a major general in Damascus, a major Iranian general in Damascus. And so Iran is coming against Israel. And so the world is on edge right now. What's going to happen? I don't know, but it is sure quite a time. But yet, the Jews they are not putting their belief or their trust on the Son of David. They're putting it on their army and so forth. But we'll see what happens. Doesn't mean they're going to lose. I believe it's going to be the opposite, that God is going to show the world that he's the God of Israel, and Israel is still a country, and he's still God, and he's the God of Israel. And when Israel defeats all the Islamic armies, then Islam is going to have a problem of whether they are going to accept the God of Israel, or will they accept the Messiah, Jesus Christ. It's an interesting time. Again, I don't have the next section, but I'll put it down here below.